At my husband's funeral, the air inside the small church felt too heavy to breathe thick with the scent of lilies and damp wood, as if grief itself had soaked into the pews. I was 29 years old, dressed in black that seemed too loose on my thin frame, my hands clutched together so tightly that the knuckles had gone white. Outside, rain tapped against the stained glass windows, creating a rhythm that mocked the silence within. The pastor's voice echoed solemn and distant, but I barely heard it. All I could focus on was the closed casket in front of me, the polished mahogany reflecting the flickering candlelight, the place where my husband should have been, his laugh, his warmth, his plans for the house we were still paying off his dream of starting a family next spring. The pews behind me were filled with his co-workers, a few of my friends and neighbors who came out of kindness. But when I looked over my shoulder, searching for my parents' faces, for my sister's presence, all I saw were empty seats, a glaring absence that burned more deeply than the loss itself. And then, just as the pastor asked the congregation to bow their heads, the doors creaked open and my parents walked in late. Not with bowed heads or tears, but with thin smiles stretched across their faces, the kind of smiles people wear at a wedding or a business meeting, not at the funeral of their son-in-law. A murmur rippled through the room. I heard someone whisper, "Why are they smiling?" I froze in my seat, my throat constricting because in that moment it felt like they weren't even part of my grief. They slid into the pew as though nothing was wrong, their eyes flicking toward me, not with sympathy, but with something sharp, something calculating. When the service ended, when the coffin was lowered and my body shook with sobs, I tried to hide. They approached me. I expected an embrace, maybe even a late apology for not standing by me earlier, but instead, my mother leaned close, her perfume mixing harshly with the scent of wet lilies, and she whispered, "We need to talk and not about him." My heart pounded, my voice cracking as I asked what she meant. My father stepped in his voice, low but firm. "Your husband left you $1 million. That inheritance should not sit with you alone. Your sister deserves it for her wedding. It's the least you can do for this family now." For a moment, I thought I had misheard. My ears rang with the aftershock of grief colliding with greed. Around us, mourners still shook hands and offered condolences, but I stood frozen, my tears drying instantly into cold fury. I had just buried the love of my life, and here in the sacred space of his farewell, my own parents turned his death into a transaction. My chest tightened as though invisible hands were crushing me. I stammered, "You cannot be serious," but my sister, who had slipped in quietly behind them, lifted her chin and said without shame, "It's only fair. You don't need it now. You're alone. I need to start my future." The audacity of her words rang louder than the church bells outside. Heads turned toward us. Someone gasped. A cough broke the silence, the crowd registering what had just been said. I felt the floor sway beneath me like grief itself had manifested as an earthquake, and in that instant I realized that the people who should have shielded me, who should have held me in my darkest hour, had instead sharpened their knives and chosen to strike at the one place still bleeding. The funeral was not only the burial of my husband, it was the burial of my faith that my family could ever truly love me. Before that funeral, before the whispers and the cruel demand, my life with Michael had been full of ordinary beauty that I thought would last forever, and remembering it now feels like replaying a movie that ends too soon. We met when I was 22 in the university library, his laugh echoing as he teased me for reading 3 law textbooks at once. He was steady an engineer with a mind that could fix anything, but what made me love him was not his mind, but his patience. The way he never rushed me, the way he held doors open and made coffee at 6 in the morning when I had exams. We married 3 years later in a small ceremony under an oak tree in my hometown, though even that day my parents' attention drifted constantly to my younger sister praising her beauty, her new boyfriend, her prospects. I remember the moment clearly. My father told me, "Don't expect us to help with a honeymoon we're saving for your sister's future wedding." It stung, but Michael squeezed my hand and whispered that we would make our own future, and I believed him. For 5 years, we built that promise. We bought a small house on the edge of town with peeling paint and a creaky porch, but it was ours. Every weekend, Michael worked on it, hammer in hand, sweat dripping as he fixed the roof, laughing that he was building our fortress. I cooked simple meals, he drank too much coffee, and we talked endlessly about the children we wanted, especially a baby by spring of the next year. My parents never visited except when they needed something. My sister Vanessa appeared occasionally not with warmth but with stories of her modeling auditions and expensive vacations, her eyes always darting around the house as if calculating what we could afford compared to her. They never treated Michael as part of the family. Even when he won an award at work for designing a new bridge support system, my father waved it off saying, "That's nothing compared to the contracts Vanessa's fiancé will land one day." Those words carved scars I never showed Michael because he already carried the weight of my family's dismissals. Then came the night of the accident, one phone call that shattered everything. Michael had stayed late at work and was driving home tired when a truck swerved into his lane. They told me it was instant, but I could not believe anything could be so sudden. When I arrived at the hospital, the sheet was already over him, and I collapsed on the cold tile, the fluorescent lights glaring, the antiseptic smell burning my nose. I called my parents that night sobbing, begging them to come. My mother's voice was flat. "It's late, we'll talk tomorrow." The next day, when I asked them to help with funeral expenses, my father muttered, "We're tight on funds. Your sister's engagement is coming priorities." I felt my chest crack open with disbelief, but I still clung to the hope they would show up at the funeral and prove me wrong. Instead, they posted pictures online at a gala smiling with donors, my mother's arm linked proudly with Vanessa's. When neighbors asked where my family was, I lied, saying they were traveling. I wanted to preserve the illusion that I was loved, but deep down, I knew the truth. Grief became my constant companion, pressing against my chest every morning as I reached for Michael's side of the bed and found only cold sheets. The nights were worse. I would wake gasping, convinced I heard his key in the door, only to sit in silence. My parents never called, not once, to ask if I was eating or sleeping. Vanessa texted once, "Sorry, sis, life goes on. Hope you're okay." Each word was like glass. And yet, amid the silence, there were people who cared. Michael's co-workers organized meals. Our neighbor Angela brought casseroles. Even the postman left a note saying he was sorry. Strangers carried me more than blood ever did. That contrast burned itself into me. It was not just grief for my husband I carried, but the growing realization that my family, the people meant to stand at my side, had chosen absence again and again, leaving me to drown. By the time the funeral came, my expectations were already buried under years of favoritism, neglect, and sharp reminders that I was never the chosen one. But still, some stubborn part of me had hoped maybe this time, maybe death would break through their indifference. Instead, what greeted me was worse than absence. They did show up, but not with bowed heads or tears. They came with smiles as if death were an opportunity. And when they leaned in after the service not to console me, but to demand Michael's inheritance for Vanessa's wedding, it was not a surprise born out of nowhere. It was the final act of a play that had been running my whole life, their cruelty dressed up as love, their greed disguised as duty, their betrayal wrapped in the excuse of family honor. After the funeral, when the last hymn faded and the crowd thinned, I thought I would finally have a moment to sit alone in the church and whisper a goodbye to Michael. Instead, my parents blocked the aisle, their faces calm, as if this were a business meeting rather than the end of my world. My mother's voice sliced through the silence. "We need to settle something before people start talking." She gestured to the side door, and against my better judgment, I followed her and my father into the church office. Vanessa was already there, her phone in hand, scrolling through bridal magazines. The contrast was obscene. The air still heavy with incense, my chest tight with grief, and my sister flipping pages of satin gowns while my mother pulled out a manila folder. She laid it on the table between us, the paper inside, crisp, already signed by a lawyer. My father pushed it toward me, his eyes cold. "Michael's life insurance payout is $1 million. It would be selfish for you to keep it. Sign this. Transfer it to a family-managed account. We'll use it for Vanessa's wedding, and what remains we'll decide later." For a moment, I thought I had fallen into a nightmare layered over reality. I looked at them, searching for some flicker of compassion, but all I found was calculation. My mother added her voice low, but dripping with false sympathy. "You're too young to handle this money alone. People will take advantage of you. It's safer with us. And isn't it better to see it bring joy rather than sit unused while you cry?" The words struck like blows. I felt my knees weaken, the edges of my vision blurring. Vanessa smirked, finally lifting her eyes from the glossy pages. It's the perfect timing. I already booked the ballroom at the Ritz. Deposits are due. Don't ruin this for me. Her tone was sharp, entitled, and so casually cruel that for a moment I forgot to breathe. I whispered, "This is my husband's legacy, not a wedding fund," but my father leaned closer, his breath heavy with coffee, his tone a threat masked as reason. Legacy means family. If you loved him, you'll love what he left to us. Don't be dramatic. The word dramatic hit me harder than any slap. For years, they had used it to dismiss my feelings, to silence me whenever I protested favoritism or neglect. Now, standing in the echo of my husband's death, they wielded it again as if my grief was a performance, and their greed the only truth. My hands trembled as I shoved the folder back toward them. "I won't sign," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. For a beat, silence hung, broken only by the rain against the window. Then Vanessa's mask cracked, her voice rising into a hiss. "You owe me. All my life I've been told you'd sacrifice for me. This is your chance to finally prove you're not useless." The venom in her words drew gasps from a church volunteer passing by who paused in the doorway, eyes wide. My parents stiffened, realizing the scene was no longer private, but instead of retreating, they doubled down. My mother clutched my arm hard enough to bruise her, whisper, "Fierce, if you don't cooperate, we'll make sure the court sees you as unstable. Everyone already pities you. It won't be hard to take control." The threat chilled me more than the storm outside. It wasn't just about money. It was about power control, erasing me completely under the guise of family duty. I pulled free, heart pounding, and left the office without looking back, my heels striking against the church floor like gunshots. I didn't know how yet, but as I stepped into the rain, I swore to myself that they would not bury me alongside Michael's memory, not without a fight. 3 days after the funeral, when I was still moving like a ghost through the hollow rooms of the house Michael and I had built my parents, and Vanessa arrived unannounced. I heard the knock, sharp and insistent, and before I could gather myself, the door swung open as if they owned the place. They did not come carrying casseroles or flowers, but with a bottle of champagne and a glossy binder full of wedding plans. Vanessa floated in first heels, clicking against the hardwood floor, her eyes scanning the living room with disdain, as though she were already imagining tearing down the memories of Michael and redecorating with her own taste. My mother set the champagne on the coffee table with a flourish, saying, "We need to celebrate new beginnings, not dwell on endings." The words hit me like ice water, as though my grief was an inconvenience to be replaced by her orchestrated joy. My father followed with the binder, slamming it down so hard the porcelain frame of Michael's graduation photo rattled. "Enough mourning," he declared. "We have arrangements to finalize. Vanessa's wedding must proceed with dignity, and that inheritance is the key." I stood frozen, my hands gripping the edge of the couch, trying to steady myself against the tidal wave of audacity. Vanessa opened the binder, flipping pages filled with lavish details, centerpieces dripping with orchids, a cake taller than me, a guest list stretching into the hundreds. She tapped a manicured nail against the price column numbers that made my stomach lurch. "This is what a proper wedding looks like," she said smugly. "And thanks to Michael's insurance, it's finally possible." Her words reduced my husband's life, his love, his every sacrifice into a line item on her budget. My chest burned as if set aflame. I whispered, "That money was his legacy, not yours," but Vanessa only rolled her eyes. "Legacy is wasted on you. You're alone now. I deserve happiness." My mother chimed in, pouring champagne into 3 glasses, deliberately skipping me. "Your father and I have already spoken to a financial advisor. It's safer if the funds are moved under our management. We'll ensure everything is handled correctly." Her tone was dripping with false benevolence, but her eyes glinted with hunger. My father raised his glass, clinking it against Vanessa's, ignoring my silence. "To family, to doing what's right." I could hear the faint sound of my neighbor Angela's dog barking outside, a reminder that the world beyond these walls still knew normalcy, but inside my home it felt like I was standing in enemy territory. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to speak louder this time. I said, "No." You will not take what Michael left me." The glasses froze halfway to their lips. My father's jaw tightened, the veneer of civility cracking. He set his glass down with a thud and leaned forward, his voice low but laced with venom. "Be careful, daughter. Grief makes people unstable. Courts listen when family expresses concern. Do you want to risk losing not just the money but your home?" The threat hung in the air like smoke suffocating. My mother added, "We can frame it as protecting you. People will believe us. You've been crying, not eating, wandering like a lost soul. Judges don't hand responsibility to unstable widows." Vanessa smirked, sipping her champagne as if the conversation were already decided. Besides, she added what's more pathetic than clinging to money when you have no one left to share it with. Her words cut deeper than any knife salt poured into wounds still bleeding. My vision blurred with tears, but rage anchored me. "Michael trusted me." "Not you," I shot back, "and I will honor him." Vanessa slammed the binder shut, the sound like a gunshot, and for a second, even my parents flinched. She stood, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "You've always been selfish. Everything was always about you, playing the martyr while I was the one meant for greatness. This time you will not ruin it. Sign the transfer or we will make sure you regret it." My mother reached for my arm nails, digging into my skin, whispering furiously, "Don't force us to destroy you. You think you're strong, but you're alone. Without Michael, you are nothing." The cruelty in her words drained the last illusion that I might still matter to them. I yanked my arm free, backing toward Michael's photograph on the mantel, using it like a shield. My voice cracked, but it carried through the room. "Get out of my house!" For a moment, they froze as if surprised I had drawn a line. Then my father laughed short and cold. "We'll see you in court then." Vanessa tossed her champagne into the sink, the liquid splattering against dishes, leaving a sticky trail. "Enjoy your little widowhood. It won't last long once people know you can't handle reality." They filed out, slamming the door behind them, leaving the smell of cheap champagne and expensive perfume lingering like poison in the air. My knees buckled as I sank onto the couch, clutching Michael's photo to my chest. I was shaking, torn between terror and fury, but beneath it all, a flame had ignited. They thought I was weak, broken, easy to erase. They were wrong. For the first time since the accident, I felt something other than grief. I felt resolve, hard and sharp as steel. The morning after they stormed out, I woke up with the sunlight slicing across the empty side of the bed, Michael's pillow still carrying the faint trace of his cologne, and I knew I couldn't let their threats linger unchallenged. The silence in the house pressed on me like a weight, but in that silence, I heard Michael's voice the way he always told me, "Don't let anyone decide your worth." So I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened a notebook, scribbling every detail of what had happened, the champagne, the threats, the binder, the words they had used. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was evidence. That same day, I called Richard Donovan, the lawyer who had handled Michael's insurance papers. He answered with a voice calm and steady, and when I told him everything, his silence stretched heavy before he finally said, "They are preparing a guardianship petition. I've seen this before. We'll need proof, lots of it." The words chilled me, but also gave me clarity. I wasn't imagining the danger. Richard met me at his office, a place lined with books and certificates, the smell of leather and coffee filling the air. He slid a recorder across the desk. "Start documenting. Every interaction. Every word." I tucked it into my purse like a weapon. When I got home, I found my neighbor Angela waiting by the mailbox. She was older, retired, sharp-eyed, and she had seen my parents leaving the house the day before. "They were arguing on the lawn," she said, "and I think you should know I've got security cameras that picked up their voices." My pulse quickened. Angela led me into her living room, the floral curtains drawn, and played the footage. Grainy video, muffled audio, but clear enough my father's voice. "We'll break her if we have to. The money will be ours." My mother's agreement, "The court will side with us. She's too fragile." Hearing it from their mouths was like swallowing glass, but it was also fuel. Angela squeezed my hand. "You're not alone, dear." Tears stung my eyes at her kindness, a stark contrast to my blood relative's cruelty. I left with a USB drive, another piece of armor. Over the next week, I gathered more. Michael's coworker sent me copies of his emails discussing the insurance payout and his clear intention that it was for me alone. His words glowed on the screen, a posthumous defense. This is for her future. She deserves security if anything happens to me. Meanwhile, Vanessa grew bolder, sending texts dripping with entitlement. Have you come to your senses? The ballroom deposit won't wait forever, each message more arrogant than the last. I saved them all screenshots, filling a folder labeled simply Truth. But betrayal has a way of spreading like rot, and I discovered it one evening when I confided in Melissa, my childhood friend who had stood beside me through college through Michael's proposal. We sat at my kitchen table, wine glasses half full, and I told her about the threats, the evidence to the lawyer. She listened, nodding, but her eyes flickered with something I couldn't name. Maybe your parents are right, she murmured finally. Maybe sharing is best. My chest tightened, my trust cracking. Days later, Richard called me, his tone urgent. Your parents' attorney filed, and Melissa submitted a statement against you claiming you've been unstable since Michael's death. The betrayal hit like a blade between the ribs. My friend of 20 years had switched sides, trading loyalty for God knows what promises. I wanted to crumble, but Richard's steady voice held me up. This strengthens their case, but it also strengthens yours if we prove collusion. Don't break now. That night, I sat at the dining table surrounded by piles of paper emails, texts, receipts, recordings, and I realized I was building more than a defense. I was building a story, the true story of who had stood by me and who had turned my grief into a weapon. I called Michael's parents who lived 3 states away, and when they heard my voice, they cried with me. His father mailed me a handwritten letter Michael had given him months earlier, stating clearly, "Every cent goes to her. Protect her if I cannot." Holding that letter, seeing Michael's familiar scrawl gave me strength I hadn't felt in weeks. Angela stopped by with cookies and slipped another envelope into my hand, her sworn statement about what she had overheard. Even small kindnesses from strangers became pillars. The postman noticed my trembling hands when I signed for a package and said, "You hang in there, ma'am." I saved his words in my memory as carefully as any document. Each ally was a thread in the net catching me before I fell. And yet the threats kept coming. Vanessa left a voicemail one evening, her tone mocking "tick-tock sis." Courts don't like unstable widows. Be smart. I replayed it, then sent it to Richard, who told me, "This is gold." Piece by piece, I built my arsenal. Grief had not disappeared, but it had transformed, sharpening into resolve. I taped Michael's photo to the folder of evidence, whispering, "This is for you. They won't win." By the time the court date was set, the folder was heavy with proof, my heart heavier still, but no longer with despair alone. It beat with something stronger, the certainty that if my parents and sister wanted a war, they had chosen the wrong battlefield. The confrontation came not in a courthouse, but in the place my parents thought they owned, the family dining room, a long mahogany table polished to a mirror, shine the same table where for years I had been told to be quiet, to let Vanessa shine, to swallow every slight with a smile. They invited me under the pretense of a family dinner, but the moment I stepped inside, I saw the trap laid out before me. Vanessa sat at the head of the table, as if she were queen, already the binder of wedding plans open beside her plate, her engagement ring sparkling under the chandelier. My father stood near the window, arms crossed, my mother pouring wine with an expression of exaggerated calm. Melissa was there too, seated smugly with them, her eyes flicking toward me, but quickly away, as if ashamed, though her betrayal already spoke louder than any apology ever could. "We thought it best to talk like adults," my father said, his voice sharp. "There's no need to drag this through court. Sign the papers tonight and we'll avoid embarrassment." I sat down slowly, sliding my purse onto my lap where the recorder was hidden, and forced myself to meet each of their eyes. "Embarrassment," I repeated softly, "is what you should feel for skipping your son-in-law's funeral for raising a toast over his death." My mother's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "That's unfair. We were making arrangements for the future. Vanessa deserves stability." Vanessa leaned forward, her tone dripping with disdain. "Stop pretending. Michael left you anything out of love. He pitied you. Everyone knows you were dead weight." The cruelty in her words drew a sharp breath from me, but I held steady. my fingers tightening around the recorder in my purse. "He left me everything because he trusted me," I said, my voice firmer now, "and I will not dishonor him by handing it to you." Melissa finally spoke. Her voice rehearsed. "Your parents only want to protect you. You've been spiraling since the accident. I told the court what I saw crying for getting things unstable. It's for your own good." Her betrayal cut deeper hearing it aloud, but I forced myself not to flinch. Instead, I leaned back, letting silence stretch before I whispered, "Funny how you know exactly what to say to strengthen their case. Almost like you rehearsed together." The room stilled Vanessa's hand tightening on her wine glass. My father slammed his fist onto the table, the sound echoing, "Enough, you will sign or you will be declared incompetent. That money will not rot in your hands." I reached into my purse, then pulling out the USB Angela had given me and slid it across the table. "This," I said, "is a recording of you outside my house plotting to break me. The court will hear it." Their faces blanched panic flickering beneath their arrogance. My mother hissed, "You wouldn't dare." I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "Try me." Vanessa shot up from her chair, her voice shrill. "You think this makes you strong. You're pathetic. You'll be alone forever. No husband, no children, just an empty house and that blood money." She spat the last words, but in her rage, she revealed more than she intended. The recorder in my purse caught every syllable. Melissa shifted uncomfortably, realizing she was implicated by association. The confrontation spiraled into shouting wine glasses tipping liquid, staining the white tablecloth like blood. My father's voice thundered, my mother pleaded, Vanessa screamed, but I sat still calm in the storm, knowing every second was evidence, every word a nail in the coffin of their case. Finally, I stood my chair, scraping loudly, and said with quiet finality, "This ends in court, not here." I left them in chaos, their shouts chasing me down the hallway, but instead of fear, I felt a surge of power. For the first time, the table where I had always been silenced had become my stage, and they had given me everything I needed to defeat them. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and coffee, its walls lined with portraits of judges long gone, their eyes seeming to watch as I stepped through the heavy double doors into the chamber where my life would be dissected. The room buzzed with quiet murmurs, the shuffle of papers, the scrape of chairs, but when I walked down the aisle, clutching the thick folder of evidence to my chest, every sound seemed to recede, leaving only the echo of my heels and the pounding of my heart. My parents sat on the opposite side, flanked by Vanessa and Melissa, their lawyer, sharp-suited, smirking, already whispering strategy. My mother avoided my eyes, my father's jaw was tight. Vanessa smirked as if the verdict were already hers, and Melissa shifted nervously, but still leaned into their camp. I sat beside Richard, who adjusted his tie, calmly slid a reassuring hand over my folder, and whispered, "We have more than enough. Just breathe." The judge entered robes, swishing gavel striking once, and the case was called. The petition read, "My family sought to have me declared financially incompetent to place Michael's inheritance under their guardianship, alleging that grief had made me unstable, incapable of managing funds responsibly." The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. Their lawyer began with a performance polished and cruel painting, me as fragile a widow collapsing under sorrow, unable to distinguish between reality and paranoia. He gestured toward Melissa, who took the stand first, her voice trembling just enough to seem believable. She recounted evenings when I had cried uncontrollably, mornings when I had forgotten appointments, the wine glasses on my table as if grief was proof of incapacity. Each word was a knife twisting our history into betrayal. My parents followed voices dripping with rehearsed concern. My mother dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, lamenting how worried she was for me, how she feared I might waste the money or fall prey to opportunists. My father leaned on his booming authority, insisting that his guidance was the only way to protect me. Vanessa was the final flourish, her testimony a venomous blend of entitlement and false sympathy. My sister means well, but she has always been unstable. Michael's death has only worsened it. This money could secure my future, our family's future, instead of vanishing into her loneliness. The words drew gasps from the gallery, the audacity so raw it sliced through the courtroom's usual restraint. Richard rose, then calm as stone, and began dismantling them piece by piece. He called Angela first, who walked briskly to the stand, her floral scarf bright against the drab wood. She held up the USB, her voice steady as she described the footage from her security cameras. The court listened to my father's voice through the tinny speakers. "We'll break her if we have to. The money will be ours." My mother's voice followed. "The court will side with us. She's too fragile." The gallery erupted in murmurs, the judge striking the gavel to restore order, but the damage was done. Their concern had unraveled into exposed greed. Next came Michael's coworker presenting the emails Michael had written detailing his intention clearly. "Every cent goes to her. She deserves security if anything happens to me." His words were like a ghostly testimony. Michael's voice speaking from beyond the grave to defend me. Then Michael's father took the stand, hands trembling as he unfolded the handwritten letter, Michael's familiar scrawl declaring, "This is for her. Protect her if I cannot." The courtroom fell silent, the weight of ink and intention heavier than any legal argument. Richard then played the voicemails Vanessa had left me, her mocking tone filling the chamber. "Tick-tock, sis. Courts don't like unstable widows. Be smart." Her own words turned into shackles binding her testimony in lies. I watched her face pale, her nails digging into the wooden table as the recording echoed. Finally, Richard asked me to stand. My legs shook, but I rose, placing Michael's photo on the witness stand beside me. I spoke not as a lawyer, not as a strategist, but as a wife who had buried her husband and then been forced to fight her own blood. I described the funeral, the champagne, the threats, the bruises from my mother's grip, the betrayal of Melissa's false statements. I spoke of the loneliness, yes, but also of the clarity that had come with their cruelty. "I am grieving," I said, my voice catching, but grief is not incompetence. Grief is love with no place to go, and the only people who have tried to exploit it are those who should have protected me. This inheritance was my husband's final act of love. To strip it from me would be to strip him away again. The gallery was silent, some wiping tears. Even the judge's eyes softened for a moment before he masked it. Richard closed with precision, tying each thread together, the recordings, the emails, the letter, the voicemails, the witnesses. "This case is not about protecting a grieving widow," he said firmly. "It is about greed masquerading as concern." The petitioners skipped a funeral to plan a wedding. They raised a toast while their son-in-law was lowered into the ground. They do not seek to protect her. They seek to erase her. The judge retired briefly, the chamber buzzing with whispers, then returned, gavel striking thrice. His voice was measured but clear. "The petition is denied. Guardianship is not granted. The inheritance remains with its rightful beneficiary." Furthermore, given the evidence of collusion and potential fraud, this court recommends that the district attorney review the petitioner's actions for possible criminal charges. The words landed like thunder. My parents stiffened. Vanessa gasped audibly. Melissa buried her face in her hands. The gallery broke into murmurs again, some even clapping before being hushed. My heart pounded with relief, with vindication, with something like Michael's hand on my shoulder. The bailiff escorted my family out, their faces masks of rage and humiliation, while Richard squeezed my hand and whispered, "Justice is yours." As I walked out of the courtroom into the bright afternoon sun, the weight on my chest finally lifted. The battle was not just won, it was recorded, witnessed, sealed in law. Michael's legacy was safe, and so was my dignity. In the days after this courtroom climax, the silence in my home no longer felt suffocating but cleansing, like the air after a storm has ripped through and torn down the rot. News traveled fast in our small town. The local paper ran a story about the petition's collapse, not naming names, but making it obvious to anyone who had watched my family arrive at the courthouse smug and leave with their heads down. I received knocks on my door from neighbors who had once stayed distant, offering casseroles, flowers, small kindnesses that reminded me not everyone was cruel. Angela came by with her dog trotting at her side, smiling warmly as she handed me fresh footage from her camera showing my parents returning to their car after the hearing, faces twisted in anger, Vanessa slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. "For your scrapbook," Angela joked, but beneath it was solidarity. Richard called to confirm the district attorney had opened an investigation into possible fraud and conspiracy, meaning my family's scheme might bring consequences beyond humiliation. He told me calmly, "Prepare for subpoenas, but this time you will be a witness, not the accused." It was a strange comfort, the idea that the law was now a shield instead of a weapon turned against me. At home, I began packing away Michael's things, not to erase him, but to preserve him. I boxed his clothes, leaving one of his jackets draped on the chair he always used, and I placed his watch in a small glass case on my nightstand. I built a memorial corner in the living room, Michael's photo, surrounded by candles, and the letter he had written to his father, the letter that had saved me in court. Each evening I lit a candle and spoke to him, telling him how the day had gone, what I had eaten, how I was still here, still standing. Vanessa tried to contact me once more, sending an envelope with glossy wedding invitations scrawled with a note. "It's not too late to do the right thing." I tore it in half and fed it to the flame of a candle, watching the edges curl and blacken until nothing remained. My parents sent no apology, only silence, but in that silence was their defeat. Melissa sent a text late one night. "I'm sorry, I didn't know it would go this far, but I left it unanswered." Some betrayals cannot be patched, only remembered as warnings. Instead of clinging to those who had harmed me, I poured my energy into building something that honored Michael's memory. I established a small foundation seeded with part of the inheritance dedicated to helping young widows and widowers navigate sudden loss. I named it the Michael Grant Legacy Fund, and when I signed the papers at the bank, my hands trembled but my heart steadied. At the first fundraiser, Angela stood beside me, Richard gave a speech about resilience, and Michael's parents mailed in a donation with a note that said simply, "He would be proud." As months passed, the investigation into my family deepened. Subpoenas unearthed Vanessa's messages to Melissa, texts coordinating testimony, even a bank draft showing my father had promised to cover part of Vanessa's wedding costs if she won guardianship. The DA filed charges of fraud and attempted financial exploitation. The trial was shorter than mine, but devastating to them. My father received probation and a hefty fine, my mother a formal reprimand that stripped her of social clout. Vanessa's wedding collapsed under debt and disgrace, and Melissa vanished from town, her reputation shredded. I did not attend their hearings. I didn't need to see them fall. It was enough to know I had survived, that truth had prevailed. Seasons turned. Leaves burned orange and fell, snow drifted against my porch, spring returned with blossoms Michael and I had once planted together. Each cycle of the year softened the edges of my grief, turning it into something I could carry without breaking. One afternoon, I walked through the local park where Michael had proposed, the sunlight catching on the small pond, and I realized I was smiling without guilt. Not because I had forgotten him, but because remembering him no longer meant drowning. In the end, I learned that family is not defined by blood or shared names, but by who stands with you when the ground crumbles. My parents, my sister, my oldest friend, they had chosen greed over love. But Angela, Richard, Michael's parents, even strangers who sent me letters after reading the newspaper, they reminded me that loyalty and kindness can come from unexpected places. Justice had not brought Michael back, but it had protected what he left behind, and it had given me a chance to keep living with dignity. As I lit a candle one evening, the house quiet and warm, I whispered, "We won, Michael. They couldn't erase us." The flame flickered as if in answer, and for the first time in a long time, I believed I was no longer just surviving. I was rebuilding.